and welcome back to my channel. My name is Muriel, and in this video I'm going to talk about atypical, but relatable, to me at least, and autistic characters, whether outright stated or coded as such, I've encountered in fiction. Why? Because I myself am a weird and witchy autistic bookworm. And I want to. Simple as that. This video will be divided into two sections, and in the first I'll start with a list of what I'll term atypical characters. So not quite neurodivergent, but not exactly the normiest of normies either. No offense to said normies, of course. I've related to a greater or lesser degree and found interesting. Then in the second section, I'll move on to the autistic or autistic coded characters and give a bit of reasoning as to why I qualify them as such. So starting with those atypical but relatable, to me at least, characters. I'm going to start with the least relatable ones, I guess, and move to the more relatable ones, but none of this is terribly rigid, so take it as it comes, basically. So starting with number 1, we have Near, or Near Goth. He has both names, in Elder Race, written by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Elder Race being a short science fiction novel. I have a dedicated book review for that if you're interested. Regardless of Near's actual personality, I'm including him on this list because his is, as far as I'm concerned, an unusually seen portrayal of what it is like to live with severe chronic depression. It is a portrayal I very deeply related to because the way Near experiences the dark night of the soul is near identical to the way I experience it. That to me is a kind of atypicality. Mental illness is a kind of atypicality. I mean, sometimes at least, so yes, it made sense to me to include him on this list. At number 2, I put in Sybel, a character from the Forgotten Beasts of Eld, written by Patricia A. McKillip. I also have a dedicated book review for that, if you're interested. One of the reasons I loved this novel, and it has stuck in my heart and mind, is precisely because I strongly related to Sybel as a solitary or introverted witch/wizard character. For a large chunk of the story, she lives alone in the forest, I'm pretty sure, in a little house with her beast companions, and spends her days, studying magic, the heavens, deep lore, etc. And at times, when I imagine escaping to a little forest abode, because yes, I do that sometimes, I'll admit I think of her own little abode as a source of inspiration. Yes, she does end up sacrificing some of that for love and companionship, but guess what? I can relate to that too, actually. So yes, she definitely belongs on this list. Then at number 3, I have two somewhat related characters because they issued from the same literary mind, Iain Banks. So first, at 3A is what I'm going to call it, we have Frank Cauldhame from the Wasp Factory. I do have to mention him, and not just Whit, who will follow, because I could, in fact, relate to certain aspects of his psyche and some of the ways he perceived the world in his story. He is a socio- or psychopath. Yes, and let's be very clear here, I don't relate to that at all. But he's also weirdly sensitive, clings to routines and rituals, and he is highly intelligent in a way that felt, well, very familiar to me, so yeah, I had to include him as well. Besides, he also reminded me of my ex David a bit, which makes sense because David and I are very similar anyway. And so at 3B is Whit from the novel Whit, again by Iain Banks. Obviously, I'd rather focus on Whit because, she's not a socio or psychopath. Here again, I related quite strongly to her intelligence, independent spirit, the way she experienced faith, and at times somewhat naive adherence to truthfulness and literalism, which is often present in autistic people, but which in her case results more from, a fairly sheltered upbringing on a culty commune. And to be fair, Frank Cauldhame also has a fairly sheltered upbringing. She is more social than Frank Cauldhame, however, and arguably more social than I am myself as well. So there is also a bit of difference there, to be fair. At the number 4 spot, again, this is not strictly, a ranking, it's a list, but so item number 4 on this list would be Angrboda from The Witch's Heart, written by Genevieve Gornichec. In this novel, an reinterpretation of a specific episode of Norse mythology, in this case it's, Ragnarok, Angrboda is initially a solitary and fairly traumatized witch giantess, which amounts to her being a kind of deity, really, because giants are kind of like gods in Norse mythology anyway. And it is precisely this partly trauma-fueled introversion and desire for solitude that I connected with. I also vibed really hard with the relationship she develops with Loki, the god who becomes her husband, and how this required of her to make herself vulnerable once again. I also really liked the motherly relationship she had with her non-human and her one barely human children. It's about the only way, actually, I can engage with motherhood as a narrative motif. I mean, which characters in and of themselves tend to be atypical in some fashion, so it's not that surprising that I tend to relate to that, really. As a quick aside, in the number 5 spot, I'll throw in, because why not, Daenerys Targaryen as an honorary mention. Okay, I think she's a bit of an edge case when it comes to, broadly speaking, atypicality, though goodness knows that the Targaryens are known for their strong and sometimes strange personalities, shall we say? But one of the reasons I love her so much of the character is because I relate very strongly to her experience of abuse, and probably related to it before I even became aware of my own experience having been abusive. And once again, because she has freaking dragons for children. And I loved my baby dinosaur Lily like a child. She was my baby, my fluffy little non-human baby. So yeah, I guess human mothering of non-humans just speaks to me on a fundamental level. And you know, her trauma, and she is an exceptional character. Not sure I relate to her on many other personality traits, but yes, I do relate to her in some very specific, visceral ways. 6th on this list is Quentin Coldwater. Yes, from The Magicians, written by Lev Grossman. Quentin suffers from depression and is, as far as I'm concerned, an intellectually gifted young man. That's what I related to, quite simply. You know, apart from the man bit. I would be the intellectually gifted, depressed woman. You get what I mean. I was incredibly moved and impacted by his story in The Magicians, a new fantasy favorite, for which I also have a dedicated book review, as I do for The Wasp Factory and Whit, by the way. And I was impacted, to be fair, because it reminded me of a couple of my exes as well, including, yes, of course, my ex David. However, I do think Quentin acts more like an asshole than I ever did. Though, like I said in my review, I suppose that's for others to decide ultimately. 7th on this, well, sub-list, and the last one in this first section, is Morgaine, or Morgaine Le Fay, though she is really only known as Morgaine in the book. Morgaine of Cornwall, maybe, when she's a child? Anyway, whatever. From the Mists of Avalon, by M.Z. Bradley. A bit like Sybel, the reason I love this character so much and relate to her quite strongly is because she also incarnates the gender non-conforming, female, knowledgeable, and introverted, kind of a loner type. I know, that was a bit of a mouthful. She a witch, basically, or, you know, rather a priestess of the goddess in this instance, but ultimately, I call same difference. Y'all can't imagine the number of times I have wished I could just retire, if only for a year, in a pagan convent, or I mean, a pagan sanctuary type thing. Yes, I have wished for that, but alas. Not possible. I also strongly related, in this specific case, to Morgaine's rejection of maternity, and to the way she related to and loved the character of Kevin the Druid as well. Because, you know, deep, layered, textured, complex relationships speak to me for reasons you can learn about in some of my other videos. Moving on to the second section about actually autistic, or at least autistic-coded characters. But first, I should specify something else. Whilst I relate to a greater or lesser degree to all of the characters I mentioned in the first section about atypical characters, I do not necessarily relate that strongly, if at all, beyond the commonality of neurodivergence to the characters I'm going to mention now in the autistic, or, you know, autistic coded section. Some of them I do relate to, but expect them towards the end of the list. First, though, I'm going to get 2-3 honorary mentions out of the way, since 2 of them, at least, I'm pulling from TV. 1 I'm pulling from a book I read almost 20 years ago. Though, I mean, to be fair, The Queen's Gambit is based on a novel as well, of the same name, written by Walter Tevis, so there is that. But yes, Beth Harmon, to me, is autistic coded in the way she relates to others, and in the way she relates to her monomaniacal passion and gift for chess. Monomania being, I believe, more common in neurodivergent people than in Gen Pop. There's also the main character in the Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. What is this title? Written by Mark Haddon, was it? I don't remember the name of the main character. I read this when I was like 12 or 13. It dates. And that is an outright autistic character. He's an autistic boy, or a boy with Asperger's syndrome, as it was called in the book, or back then, or whatever. So yes, he is an autistic kid. He is considered, I believe, by the community to be a pretty stereotypical example of autism. Fair enough. I didn't specifically relate that strongly to him when I read it as a child, or I mean older child, though it did spark a very intense, brief, but intense interest in the subject of autism, and now I'm like, did that mean more than I think it did? Perhaps. Beyond that, though, I don't have much to say about this book, but that is a book with a clearly stated to be autistic character. And then there's my main man, Sheldon Cooper, from The Big Bang Theory, which, of course, isn't based on any sort of literary material. He very, very smart, but he also very socially disabled. He's a massive nerd, a clean freak, has OCD-like tendencies, feels disconnected from his body. He says at one point to Penny, my body and I maintain a cold, weary distance from one another, and I'd like to keep it that way, or something to that general effect. And I'm like, yeah, I know what you mean there. And of course, he struggles to understand other humans, especially less intelligent humans, or humans he perceives to be less intelligent. Hashtag relate. Okay, now I'm going to go into the list proper, with number 1 being Jane Eyre, from the eponymous novel written by Charlotte Brontë. This is definitely the character I feel the least confident about. I have seen her put forward as a candidate for what I'll call covert autism in literature, or fiction more generally, and from what I can recall of the novel, I can kind of see it. She is introverted, independent in spirit, once again, especially for a woman at that time, intelligent, self-educated, kind of, or I mean curious about things, not particularly sociable. I mean, she gets on with, what's his face? Mr. Rochester? Yeah, so I mean, pretty isolated living circumstances, and she seems pretty chill with that, I guess. I'd say she's specific, maybe in her attachments. Again, that whole relationship with Mr. R. But I really need to reread Jane Eyre, and I might change my mind about her. I'm probably going to reread it next year, actually, because I want a fresher opinion about this. As an aside, however, I've also seen it argued some, or all, of the Brontë sisters could have been autistic themselves. I haven't, looked that deeply into it either, and I honestly don't have a strong opinion about that one, so make of it what you will. I've also seen this argument made about Virginia Woolf. From the little I know about her, that kind of tracks, actually. I mean, yes, you're not supposed to DX dead people. It's all in good fun, right? So Virginia Woolf, I could kind of see, actually. I kind of think Tolkien could have been, actually, though, maybe like 50-50, 60-40. However, H.P. Lovecraft was autistic. Come on, can we all agree about this? It's kind of bloody obvious. Or he had some kind of neuropsychiatric profile that imitated autism in any case. But to me, he's a very strong candidate for retroactively diagnosed autism. Like 80 to 90% chance, I would argue. Anyway, moving on. In the number 2 spot, I put Rydra Wong, a character, the main character from Babel 17, written by Samuel R. Delany. Now, she is, I'm pretty sure, the only character on this list who is clearly stated in text to be autistic. Apart from the boy in Curious Incident of the Dark in the Nighttime, but that was more of an honorary mention. Like I said, Rydra Wong is said to be autistic in the text, and she's a woman too. For the time, that was pretty different, if you think about it. But, apart from the fact she is a woman with autism, I don't remember much about her as a character. Hasn't stuck in my mind. The story of Babel 17 hasn't stuck that well in my mind either, to be honest. I didn't really enjoy that novel that much. So yeah, her autism didn't jump out to me as being particularly relatable. So yeah, I recall she is written as being, fairly to highly intelligent and having an extraordinary gift for languages. That's, why she's involved in the whole Babel 17 plot to begin with. But beyond that, I don't have much to say about her, but she is, again, explicitly stated to be autistic, so I kind of had to include her on this list. In the number 3 spot, I put Octopus Dude from Children of Ruin, written by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Apologies to the dude in question, but I don't remember his name, and I couldn't be asked to look it up in my copy of the book. Yes, there is a character in Children of Ruin that really freaking loves octopuses and works on the terraforming super intelligent octopus project in that novel. So yay! And from what you're given of him in the book, he is very much the socially inept, prefers the company of non-human creatures, intelligent, expert, scientist type of autistic person, which I can kind of relate to be fair. And that's all I have to say about that. In the number 4 spot, I put Ignatius Riley from A Confederacy of Dunces written by John Kennedy Toole. Like I said in my last monthly reading wrap-up for July, Ignatius is basically a plumper and humanities rather than STEM-aligned version of my main man Sheldon Cooper. Aggravating social ineptitude? Check. Strict need for routines? Check. Aversion to change? Oh, check. Sense of bafflement when confronted with average social conventions and interactions? Check. Unusual relationship to body and intimacy? Check. High IQ but low EQ? Checkity. Check, check, check. Oh yes, he is very obviously autistic coded and very amusing. I guess it's not cool to poke fun at him because of that. I think it goes beyond that, honestly. It pokes fun at humanity in general, so it gets a pass. Now, of those first 4 characters, I'd say I relate the most to Jane Eyre and Ignatius Riley's personality traits and peculiarities, though I would give an edge to the former over the latter. In the number 5 spot, I put Lisbeth Salander from the Millennium trilogy written by Stieg Larsson. I don't think it's ever outright stated she has it in text, but I do believe it is very, very strongly implied. She has, Asperger's syndrome, so that she is autistic, basically. Yes, I have read the Millennium trilogy again a while ago. She is a genius at coding or hacking. She's not good with standard ways of communicating and social norms, and experiences relationships in a rather idiosyncratic fashion, shall we say? If I recall correctly, of course. She also has a history of severe psychiatric, institutional, and sexual abuse, and whilst my own lived experience wasn't as bad as hers, thankfully, I'm most definitely familiar with psychiatry fucking up with me, and sexual abuse. Yay for me. So yes, I can definitely relate to her in several ways. Also, fun fact, I kinda had a bit of a crush on her back when I first read the books and watched the David Fincher adaptation. So I guess I lied. I have in fact experienced a literary, and mildly scared actually, crush at least once. Whoopsie. In the number 6 spot, I put The Biologist from Annihilation / The Southern Reach trilogy written by Jeff Vandermeer. Of course, one of my all-time favorites. I've talked about The Biologist in my review of the Southern Reach trilogy, if you want to check that out. But to reiterate, she's an expert in her field of ecological science, feels ill at ease in normal society, didn't have any friends when she was married, feels a strange sense of belonging in Area X, which is very sus in and of itself, let's be real, and thinks about her marriage and her attachments in ways which I think would seem a tad strange to the average Joe. That's how I reason it. As an additional aside, there is a character in Hummingbird Salamander that reminded me of The Biologist a little, and what's interesting in her case is that it's pretty obvious she suffers from, at the very least, sensory processing disorder, so SPD, something which you can have without being autistic, to be very clear, but which is extremely common, if not intrinsic, to autism. In the number 7 spot, I'm putting Luna Lovegood from the Potterverse written by none other than J.K. Rowling. Because fuck it, you know what? I'm putting her on this list because the more I think about it, the more I'm like, you know what? Yeah, it could fit. Luna Lovegood is also, incidentally, my favorite Potterverse character. Wait, you thought it would have been Brainy Hermione, right? You did, didn't you? Nope. When I started reading the series as a child, kind of. And have I been compared to Hermione in the past? Yes. However, it is quirky, mildly off-kilter Luna I vibe with the most. Plus she's a Ravenclaw, so there's that, because obviously I'm a Ravenclaw. Mix between Ravenclaw and Slytherin, but anyway, another discussion for another day. I'm, of course, not arguing there's a super strong case to be made here, right? If I had to choose one Potterverse character and claim her as autistic, it'd defo be good old Luna. Whereas Hermione, you see, I think she's just intellectually gifted, which is atypical in and of itself. You could put her in the atypical category most definitely, but Luna, she goes in the autistic one. Plus, Luna has an equally quirky and obsessive father, so check for the weirdo genetics element. She is sensitive in ways that make her odd, to say the least, sees things no one else does. The most literal interpretation of this is she sees thestrals, but then so does Harry, because you see them if you've seen someone die, and, you know, she provides a perspective that is, well, somewhat outside of the norm. So there. Number 8 on this list is Eleanor Oliphant. From Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine, written by Gail Honeyman. There again, expect a dedicated book review at some point. But I might as well address the autistic Oliphant. Yeah, it's a stupid joke, I know. In the room here. Now, let me be clear. I really do not care that the author has stated outright her character is not canonically autistic. But I'm pro-death of the author in every which way, so I do not care. CPTSD, from which she also, you know, Eleanor most definitely suffers, and to which I could also relate, does not provide, as far as I'm concerned, an explanation for all of her peculiarities. Her literalism, her under-applied intelligence and knowledgeability, the difficulties she has understanding and going along with social norms, her sensitivity, those are all things I see in Eleanor's case as being autistic and not just CPTSD coded. Sue me. That being said, is this precise blend of trauma, neurodivergence, and resultant depression that I related to so strongly. I saw quite a bit of myself in Eleanor and was moved all the more by her story for it. Yes. And the exact same can be said for number 9 on this list, Marianne from Normal People, written by Sally Rooney, whose covert neurodivergence and intertwined experience of trauma I've also talked about in my dedicated book review for Normal People. That book, I actually did finally bump up my rating for it, by the way. I bumped it up to a 9. Fuck it, yeah. It hurt me, but it hurt me in a good way. Not really, but still, 9 out of 10. Marianne at 17/18 years old was me at 17/18 years old, or, you know, the other way around. Whatever. Highly intelligent, highly introverted, alexithymic, as far as I'm concerned, confused but sensitive, masking Marianne is straight up one of the most personally relatable characters I've ever encountered in fiction. It doesn't have to make her autistic coded, of course, but to me it makes eminent sense to read her as such. And so I did, and so I will continue to do. And of those 5 final characters, I relate the most to the last 3, especially Eleanor Oliphant and Marianne something from Normal People. Of course, let's be clear here, this is all, or mostly, a question of personal interpretation and personal appreciation, right? You are very much free to think differently and disagree with me here. Let's discuss this in the comments, in fact, or on my Discord server if you want. Link is in the description down below, once again. And I invite you to share your own autistic coded and or interestingly atypical characters if you feel so inclined as well. But on that note, I hope you all have a lovely day, evening, whichever time of day you prefer. Do take good care of yourselves. Thank you for the continued support. And I shall see you all, once again, reasonably soon, in another video. Bye-bye.